Sarah Meixel with thepigsite.com, and today we're here with Montse Torremorell. She is with the University of Minnesota. So thanks for being with us today, Montse.
Thank you for having me.
Very good. And today, we're here at the North American PRRS Conference in Chicago, and you really set up a platform from a PRRS standpoint. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to give you a bit of an overview about the presentations today and trying to make the case why I think we need to redirect some of our research efforts to start looking in more detail about what happens in growfinish if we really want to be making significant efforts to advance the control of PRRS in regions. When you really think about it, and rightly so, in the last few years we have focused our research our efforts to control PRRS virus in the sow herds, okay, with all the protocols for acclimatization, herd closure, all the investments on biosecurity. We started in the sow herd because we recognized that we needed a wean pig that was PRRS negative, so we had to focus on that. However, now that we already know to a certain degree what to do, not that we know all the answers, but we know a little bit what to do, I think it's time to really looking at that pig after it leaves the sow farm and until we place it in the nursery and in the growfinish, if we really want to then make efforts to advance PRRS control in the region. And in part it's because we have evidence from other diseases and even from the PRRS itself that what happens in the growfinish, it matters to the sow farms, okay? So there is evidence that infections can spread from growfinish to the sow farm, that then again those sow farms break, then they wean positive pigs, then those positive pigs again, they seed an area with virus, and then they represent risk for other sow farms. But unfortunately, we don't really have all the answers yet about what happened in the growfinish, and that's what some of the presenters today were starting to address. So there is starting to be some research in that area, and then more research will follow to try to understand what happens.
Very good. And tell me a little bit about some of the highlights that we heard, because there were 3 or 4 presenters after you. You really kind of set it up, and then they talked. What were a few of the highlights that the group heard today?
Yeah, so the first presentation was given by Dr. Jose Angulo, who he's looked at the dynamics of PRRS infection in a stable in growfinish or in wean to finish herds, that they were placed negative at weaning, and that they were located in the Midwest area. Okay. And in that study, interestingly, what he showed is about 50% of the herds will get infected with wild-type virus after placement. Okay. He's also starting to look into the risk factors, why infections happen, and then he's starting to look also at the impact on mortality. So there is that additional incentive to control PRRS in growfinish because it affects mortality. But from a risk factors point of view, things that we start looking at this data set is understanding, how the pigs are being taken care of, how you unload the pigs, location plays a role, and that's actually where we have to dig into it even more if we really want to understand what practices we need to implement to keep those pigs that are negative at placement. What do we have to do to keep them negative after placement? So that's what was one of the first presentations that was, I think, insightful for understanding that about 50% of the sites will have wild-type virus unless we do something about it. The second presentation was by Mariana Kikuti, she was more into understanding, the virus evolution in those sites. And again, very interesting information in terms of understanding what sequencing mean in those growfinish. Obviously, we have enough. We need to have enough enough samples to understand or interpret the sequencing. But it tells us that these viruses, they are not very stable. Some variants of the PRRS virus they seem not to change very much, but other variants, they change a lot, or they can change a lot. And she's focusing on understanding that, with the goal also down the road to try to associate whether some of those variants have a much more higher impact on production or not. But again, to understand that, we still need to work on the tools to analyze those variants of PRRS virus, and she spoke about that. Another study that was very interesting as well by Dr. Cesar Maura, he started looking into not just the dynamics of the PRRS virus in those growfinish, but also to how to control the virus. And he's looking to pigs that originated from both stable herds and non-stable herds. And interestingly, in that study, the incidence of infections was much higher than the one presented in the herds in the Midwest. So in his study, the incidence of the number of sites that would get infected with PRRS was higher than 90%. So in that neighborhood, so it's a lot of the sites would become positive with PRRS. But again, that was a different location of the herds. But again, it just tells you that those infections are very prevalent. So in that, on top of that, he started exploring the use of the vaccine, PRRS vaccine, to control PRRS. And as you know, most of the sites, even it was presented today, over 90% of the sites will vaccinate PRRS. But what was unique and interesting in this study, and to a certain degree goes against conventional, what we thought based on prior research, is that they used 2 vaccinations of PRRS, not just one, only one, and even in pigs that originated from acutely infected farms or unstable and non-stable farms.
Right.
So, and we saw in those cases that vaccine actually was helpful to lower mortality, which to me that was very, very encouraging, because often you are in the middle of these PRRS breaks in the sow farm, and it's very frustrating because you see the pigs dying and doing very poorly. But then this study showed that by having 2 vaccines, those pigs end up doing better than if they had only one vaccine. So I think that's an area that we need to explore more about it and see, what else needs to be done, because that data was very encouraging, and also it would pay off.
Right,
it would pay off, and that's something that the producers always want to look at. The last presenter, Dr. Magallanes also talked about, his presentation was not specific to PRRS, but he was talking about more understanding, again, the mortality and how to integrate the different databases that these production systems have, but often they don't talk to each other, okay? And develop a system in place, have more of a big data set in which allows you to do a better job about predicting mortality and about predicting what factors matter for mortality, taking in consideration just not a single aspect of a disease or a single aspect of the production system, but comprehensively. And I think that's where many systems will want to go going forward to control disease, because as you know, diseases are complex, and we need to have multiple sources of information if we really want to make advance on our efforts to control PRRS in this case, or other diseases in general. So again, I think we are at a point in the industry in which we have an opportunity not to abandon what we've done in the sow herds, not that we don't have to continue the research in the sow herds, we have to do that, but we also have to start understanding more about what happens in the growfinish. The growfinish, it's probably, from a biosecurity perspective, it's probably our weakness, I think you called it our weakness as an industry, because that's where we have a lot of the pigs, and that's where we still don't put a lot of the efforts on biosecurity. And I'm not just thinking about PRRS, I'm thinking about other diseases too, that unless we start tightening up or putting more effort about what will happen in growfinish, it will be very hard to keep sow farms negative or protected in the long run. So that's why we have to look at both sides of the equation going forward.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for all the information, Montse. This was a great recap of a lot of great information in there. So.
Oh, the presenters did a very nice job showing us what they do.
Very good. Thanks again.
Thank you.
This is Sarah Meichel with the Pig Site.